Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Infidelity Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, Fracture Points. August rain pelted against the windows of the Harmon residence as Nathaniel, Nate, Harmon stared at the shattered picture frame on his office floor. The broken glass had scattered across the polished hardwood, much like his marriage, once whole, now in pieces. At 42, Nate had built everything from nothing. The son of a bankrupt contractor who'd taken his own life when Nate was just 15, he'd clawed his way through life with calculated precision. His security consulting firm now protected the assets of half the wealthy families in Westport, Connecticut. He knew how to anticipate threats, how to neutralize them before they materialized. But he had failed to secure what mattered most. Veronica Sullivan Harmon, his wife of 7 years, had grown distant over the past 18 months. Tonight's argument had been the worst yet. Her unexplained absences, mysterious texts, and sudden disinterest in their life together had finally boiled over. "You're paranoid, Nate," she'd said, her voice cool as she applied lipstick in their bathroom mirror. "I'm working late because the gallery has a major exhibition coming up. Not everyone gets to set their own hours like you do." Veronica's contemporary art gallery had become successful largely due to Nate's connections and investment. He believed in her vision when no one else would. Now, at 38, she was firmly established in the art world, her name carrying weight in circles that had once dismissed her. Nate knelt to pick up their wedding photo from among the glass shards. The image captured a moment of what he'd thought was authentic happiness. Veronica's emerald eyes bright with promise, his own face softer than it had been in years. His phone buzzed with a text from Lyle Winters, his oldest friend and the only person who knew the full extent of his suspicions. "Drinks at Russell's? You sound like you need it." Nate responded, agreeing to meet in an hour. As he pocketed his phone, he noticed the folded brochure on his desk, the exclusive Fiji resort he'd booked for their second honeymoon next month. An extravagant gesture to rebuild what was crumbling between them. At Russell's, the oak-paneled bar provided the perfect backdrop for confidential conversations. Lyle, a weather-beaten former Marine with shrewd eyes, listened as Nate laid out the pattern. 3 times last month her car wasn't at the gallery when she claimed to be working late, Nate said, nursing his whiskey. Her gallery director let slip that Veronica had taken personal days when she told me she was meeting clients. "Have you thought about having her followed?" Lyle asked. "I'm not there yet," Nate replied, though the thought had crossed his mind. "The honeymoon will tell me everything I need to know. 2 weeks, just us. No excuses, no distractions. And if your suspicions are confirmed?" Nate's expression hardened. "Then I'll do what I've always done. Eliminate the threat with absolute precision." Lyle recognized the look in his friend's eyes. It was the same cold resolve Nate had shown when 3 armed men had attempted to rob the charity gala they'd attended last year. While others panicked, Nate had calmly assessed and neutralized the situation before security even arrived. One robber had ended up with shattered kneecaps. Nate had claimed it was self-defense. Lyle knew better. "Just don't do anything that can't be undone," Lyle cautioned. Nate's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The only things I regret in life are my hesitations." Later that night, as Nate lay awake beside his sleeping wife, he found himself recalling their beginning. Veronica had been vibrant, ambitious, a struggling artist with dreams larger than her studio apartment. They'd met when she'd catered an event his firm was securing. He'd been captivated by her fiery independence, so different from the calculated world he inhabited. He turned to study her profile in the darkness. Who was this woman now? And more importantly, who else was she when not with him? His security firm had taught him that everyone has vulnerabilities. Everyone has secrets. The question was simply how deep one needed to dig to find them. The second honeymoon would be his excavation. One way or another, he would uncover the truth buried beneath the surface of their marriage. Chapter 2, The Empty Terminal. The departures terminal at JFK bustled with pre-holiday travelers. Nate checked his watch for the 5th time, 2:17 p.m. Their flight to Fiji was scheduled for 3:45 p.m., and Veronica was nowhere to be seen. 3 calls to her phone had gone straight to voicemail. 2 text messages remained unread. The knot in Nate's stomach tightened. He'd dropped her at her mother's house that morning, where she was supposed to be having brunch before meeting him at the airport. Patricia Sullivan had always regarded Nate with thinly veiled disapproval, despite the financial support he'd provided when her investment business collapsed. As passengers for earlier flights streamed toward their gates, Nate's phone vibrated. Patricia's name appeared on the screen, not Veronica's. Red flags immediately raised in his mind. The message was brief, devastating in its calculated cruelty. She's in Cabo with her ex-boyfriend. Don't come home. The terminal seemed to freeze around him. Noise faded to a distant hum. 7 years of marriage reduced to 13 words of text. Dominic. It had to be Veronica's college boyfriend who had supposedly remained a casual friend. The photographer who had reconnected with her through the gallery last year. Nate had seen the way Dominic looked at his wife during the gallery's spring exhibition, like a man remembering something he once possessed. A lesser man might have caused a scene, might have called Patricia screaming, or sent desperate messages to Veronica. But Nathaniel Harmon had learned long ago that emotions were weapons best wielded cold. He picked up his carry-on bag and walked calmly to the ticket counter. With practiced charm, he explained a family emergency had arisen, and he would need to cancel his trip. The airline representative, sympathetic to his composed explanation, processed the cancellation with minimal fees. While waiting, he sent a single text to Patricia. Thank you for the information. No questions, no accusations, no emotions that could be used against him later. Next, he called Florence Kennedy, his head of operations at Harmon Security. Florence, I need immediate surveillance on Veronica. Track her credit cards, phone, and social media. I want to know exactly where in Cabo she's staying, who she's with, and every move she makes. Florence, efficient as always, asked no personal questions. Understood. Timeline, yesterday if possible. His next call was to his longtime ally, attorney Theodore Bryant. Ted, I need you to clear your schedule for a meeting tomorrow morning. I'm initiating divorce proceedings. Nate, I'm sorry, Ted replied, genuine concern in his voice. But you should know, Connecticut is a no-fault state. If you're thinking about, I'm not interested in what the state defines as fault, Nate interrupted. I'm interested in what I define as justice. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. After hanging up, Nate booked a room at the Four Seasons rather than returning to their empty house. In the serene environment of a luxury hotel, he opened his laptop and began creating folders, financial records, property documentation, communication logs. Each piece of his life with Veronica would be dissected with surgical precision. Hours later, as night fell over New York, Nate stood at the hotel window overlooking the glittering city. He felt no pain, only a cold clarity. This betrayal had not broken him. It had merely confirmed what life had taught him repeatedly. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. His phone pinged with a preliminary report from Florence. Veronica's credit card had been used at the Esperanza Resort in Cabo, San Lucas. 2 guests. The reservation was under Dominic Walsh's name. Nate's lips curved slightly. Not even the decency to hide her tracks. She'd counted on his shock, his hurt, his desperation, emotional responses that would give her the upper hand. She'd severely miscalculated. He opened his contacts and began making calls. By morning, he would have allies positioned throughout Cabo, San Lucas, eyes watching his wife's betrayal unfold in real time, evidence gathering for what would come next. The final call was to Lyle. It's worse than I suspected, Nate said without preamble. Lyle's response was measured. What do you need? Time, space, discretion. You've got it. And Nate? Don't let this turn you into someone you're not. Nate's laugh was hollow. This isn't changing me, Lyle. It's revealing me. As he ended the call, Nate accessed his private safe deposit box records. Inside box number 307 at First Maritime Bank lay insurance policies he'd taken out long ago, contingencies for catastrophic betrayal. The contents would destroy lives as thoroughly as his had just been upended. He sent one final message before retiring for the night. to his wife's phone. Enjoy Cabo. Rest well. 3 simple sentences that revealed nothing of what was to come. The silence that followed would be his first act of psychological warfare, letting uncertainty take root in her mind while he prepared his calculated response. Chapter 3. The Architect's Blueprint. 1 week passed with calculated silence from Nate. No calls, no texts, no emotional outbursts that Veronica might have expected. Meanwhile, his network had been building a comprehensive dossier on her activities. Florence's team had documented Veronica and Dominic's every move in Cabo, from their beachfront cabana to their intimate dinners. Meanwhile, Nate had assembled a war room in a secure office suite in downtown Westport, walls covered with timelines, financial records, and surveillance photos. Ted Bryant studied the display with growing concern. "This is thorough, Nate. Thoroughness prevents mistakes," Nate replied, adjusting a photograph showing Veronica and Dominic embracing on a private yacht. "And I don't intend to make any." "The divorce filing is ready," Ted said, placing a folder on the conference table. "But I'm worried about your approach. This level of surveillance is perfectly legal when conducted in public spaces," Nate finished. "Everything here was obtained through legitimate channels." Ted sighed. "That's not what concerns me. It's the intensity. I've known you for 15 years, and I've never seen you like this." "You've never seen me betrayed like this," Nate replied evenly. The truth was, Nate had been here before, not with a wife's betrayal, but with his father's business partner who had embezzled their company funds, leading to his father's suicide. At 17, Nate had systematically destroyed the man's reputation, business relationships, and marriage through carefully planted information and strategic moves. The man had left town in disgrace, never knowing who had orchestrated his downfall. Nate had learned then that revenge served cold required 3 elements: complete information, strategic patience, and a willingness to trigger catastrophic consequences. His phone buzzed with a notification. According to Florence's contact at the Esperanza Resort, Veronica and Dominic had just checked out. They were returning to Connecticut. "It's time for Phase 1, Nate announced. When Veronica's key turned in the lock of their home the next evening, she found the house dark and silent. As she wheeled her luggage into the foyer, motion-activated lights illuminated the space. On the entry table sat a single envelope with her name written in Nate's precise handwriting. Inside was a printed itinerary of her Cabo trip, complete with timestamps, locations, and photographs, alongside legal divorce papers. No note, no emotional plea, just the cold, hard evidence of her betrayal documented with meticulous precision. As she stood frozen, her phone rang. "Patricia, he's here." Her mother's voice was tense. "Nate just showed up at my house with a police officer." Veronica's pulse quickened. "What? What?" "Something about the text I supposedly sent him." Patricia's voice dropped to a whisper. "Veronica, I never sent any text about Cabo." The realization hit Veronica like a physical blow. She hadn't told anyone where she was going except Dominic. Someone had accessed her mother's phone, or spoofed her number, to send that message to Nate, which meant he had known, had been watching, had been planning. Her phone beeped with an incoming text. From Nate. "Your mother makes a convenient scapegoat, but we both know who made the choice to leave. Police are just confirming the identity theft I reported. Nothing more. Yet." The implied threat in that final word sent a chill through her. Across town, Detective Ellis Porter watched as Nate calmly explained the situation to Patricia. "Someone used your identity to send me devastating news while I waited at the airport," Nate said, his tone reasonable and measured. "I'm not accusing you, Patricia. I simply need to document this for the ongoing investigation." Patricia's face had drained of color. "I would never. Whatever problems you and Veronica have are between us," Nate finished smoothly. "I'm merely following proper procedure for reporting potential identity fraud. Detective Porter is here as a courtesy, given the personal nature of the situation." Detective Porter, who had worked with Nate's security firm on numerous cases, maintained professional detachment. "We just need to verify your phone records, Mrs. Sullivan. Standard procedure." As they departed, Porter murmured to Nate, "This doesn't feel like a standard identity theft case." "It isn't," Nate replied quietly. But your report will be crucial evidence down the line. I appreciate your thoroughness. Just don't make me regret helping you, Porter warned. Nate's smile was razor thin. The only people who will have regrets aren't in this car. Later that night, Nate sat in his temporary apartment reviewing Florence's latest report. Dominic Walsh had returned to his downtown loft. Financial analysis revealed he had recently received a substantial wire transfer from an offshore account. $250,000 2 days before the Cabo trip. More interesting was what Florence had uncovered about Dominic's photography business. His artistic reputation was built on a foundation of manufactured credentials and strategic relationships. The man had been carefully cultivating connections with wealthy patrons, primarily through their wives. Your wife wasn't his first conquest, Florence noted. There's a pattern here. And patterns are predictable, Nate replied, which makes them exploitable. He opened his laptop and accessed a secure server, typing a series of commands that activated dormant protocols. Within minutes, specialized software began systematically accessing accounts and networks connected to both Veronica and Dominic. By morning, their digital lives would be fully compromised, not to steal or destroy, but to monitor. Every email, text message, and phone call would flow through Nate's systems before reaching its destination. Knowledge was power, and he intended to be omniscient. The final piece of his initial strategy involved Veronica's gallery. As principal investor, Nate held significant leverage over its operations. With a few signatures, he could trigger clauses in their business agreement that would require immediate financial restructuring. Not enough to destroy what she'd built. That would come later, but sufficient to create pressure, uncertainty, and fear. As midnight approached, Nate reviewed his blueprint for the weeks ahead. Unlike his father, who had collapsed under betrayal's weight, Nate would turn it into leverage. He would dismantle the lies of those who had wronged him with such precision that they would never recover, never understand exactly how their world had been engineered to implode. He sent a single text to Lyle. It begins tomorrow. The response came quickly. Remember who you are. Nate smiled grimly at the screen. That was precisely the point. They had forgotten who he was, what he was capable of. But they would remember soon enough. Chapter 4, Pressure Points. On Monday morning, Veronica arrived at her gallery to find her staff gathered in the lobby, expressions tense. Her director, Maxwell, pulled her aside immediately. There's someone from the bank here, he whispered. They're saying there's an issue with our operating line of credit. Veronica's stomach dropped. The gallery operated on carefully balanced finances, with their credit line as a crucial buffer between exhibition expenses and sales revenues. In the conference room, a woman in a crisp suit introduced herself as Dana Collingwood from First Maritime Bank. Mrs. Harmon, I regret to inform you that we're implementing a review of your gallery's credit arrangements, she stated without preamble. During this review period, access to your business line of credit will be temporarily restricted. That's impossible, Veronica protested. We have major exhibition costs due this week. Artists to pay. Understand your concern, Dana replied, sliding a document across the table. However, the terms of your financing agreement include a provision for review upon significant changes in the business's backing structure. What changes? Veronica demanded. Harmon Security Consulting has notified us of their intent to divest their interest in the gallery, Dana explained. As they represent 60% of your business's secured backing, this constitutes a material change. Veronica felt the blood drain from her face. Nate hadn't just filed for divorce. He was systematically untangling their business ties in ways designed to create maximum pressure without explicitly destroying her gallery. This is personal, Veronica said. My husband is punishing me through my business. Dana's expression remained impassive. The bank doesn't involve itself in personal matters, Mrs. Harmon. We're simply following standard risk management protocols. After Dana left, Veronica called Dominic in a panic. He's freezing my business assets. I need the money you promised, now, not next month. Dominic's voice was tense. I'm having cash flow issues myself. My biggest client just canceled our contract with no explanation. What Dominic didn't tell her was that he'd received an anonymous email that morning containing detailed evidence of his pattern of seducing wealthy clients' wives, along with manipulated photos suggesting he shared private images of these women with others. The email had been sent to his most important client, a conservative tech CEO with a jealous streak, from what appeared to be a concerned employee. Across town, Nate sat with Theodore Bryant, reviewing the preliminary legal strategy. The bank restriction is temporary, Nate explained, just enough to create financial strain without pushing her into bankruptcy. I don't want her desperate yet, just uncomfortable. Ted frowned. In Dominic's client situation, an unfortunate coincidence, Nate replied with a thin smile. Though I hear the art world can be fickle. Nate, this coordinated pressure, it's bordering on harassment. It's business, Nate corrected. I'm simply protecting my investments and reconsidering my philanthropic priorities. His phone buzzed with a message from Florence P. Sullivan attempting to liquidate retirement accounts. Intervention needed? Nate typed back. Monitor only. Let her access funds. Patricia Sullivan had always been financially irresponsible, a trait Veronica had inherited. Nate knew that under pressure, both women would make predictable mistakes. Patricia withdrawing retirement funds likely meant Veronica had already asked her mother for financial help. The dominoes were falling exactly as he'd anticipated. That evening, Lal met Nate at his temporary apartment, concern evident in his expression. Your wife tried to contact me today, Lal said, accepting the whiskey Nate offered. She thinks you've gone off the deep end. What did you tell her? That I hadn't heard from you, Lal replied. Which was technically true until you called an hour ago. Nate, she sounded scared. Good, Nate said flatly. Fear is clarifying. Lal studied his friend. This isn't just about the affair, is it? This is about something deeper. Nate's expression hardened. Did I ever tell you what my father said before he killed himself? He said, the world belongs to those willing to do what others won't. For years, I thought he meant that as a warning against crossing lines. Now I understand it was instruction. For revenge. For justice, Nate corrected. Veronica didn't just cheat, she calculated. That money transfer to Dominic? It came from our joint investment account. She funded her affair with my money. Lyle's eyes widened. That changes things. It's not about the money, Nate continued. It's the deliberate betrayal, the planning, the cold-blooded choice to deceive me while benefiting from everything I built. What's your endgame here? Financial ruin isn't enough. Nate smiled thinly. Ruin is just the beginning. I want them to experience what I did, standing in that airport terminal, realizing that everything they believed was a lie. But unlike me, they'll never recover from it. Later that night, as Nate reviewed the day's intelligence reports, a new piece of information caught his attention. According to Florence's sources, Dominic had made 3 calls to a private investigator after losing his client. He was trying to discover who was behind his sudden professional troubles. Nate made a note to have Florence plant false evidence leading Dominic toward one of his professional rivals. Misdirection was a crucial element of his strategy. Keep them looking in the wrong directions while the real trap was being set. Meanwhile, across town, Veronica sat in her darkened gallery, papers spread across her desk. The exhibition costs due this week totaled $175,000. Her personal accounts contained less than a third of that. Her mother had contributed another $50,000 from her retirement fund, but they were still short. Her phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. Financial troubles? Perhaps we should discuss your gallery's future. Kingston Thomas, Thomas Capital Partners. Veronica stared at the message with a mixture of suspicion and hope. Kingston Thomas was a notorious art world investor known for swooping in on vulnerable galleries. His terms were always predatory, but his cash was always green. What she didn't know was that Kingston Thomas had recently done business with Harmon Security Consulting, and that Nate had placed a very specific call earlier that day. The next piece of his plan was moving into position. Chapter 5, False Refuges. Kingston Thomas's office occupied the top floor of a sleek downtown building, its walls adorned with blue-chip artwork that conveyed both wealth and calculated taste. At 65, Thomas had the silver-haired gravitas of old money, though rumors persisted that his fortune had less reputable origins. Mrs. Harmon, he greeted Veronica warmly. Or is it Miss Sullivan again now? Veronica stiffened. My marital status isn't relevant to our discussion. On the contrary, Thomas countered, gesturing her to a seat. It's entirely relevant. Your gallery's current difficulties stem directly from your changing relationship with your primary investor. My gallery stands on its own merits, Veronica insisted. Indeed it does, Thomas agreed smoothly, which is why I'm prepared to offer you a financing solution. He slid a folder across his desk. Inside was a term sheet offering a $500,000 investment in exchange for a controlling interest in the gallery. This is robbery, Veronica said, closing the folder. You're asking for 70% ownership for this amount. Thomas's smile never wavered. I'm offering a lifeline when you're drowning, Miss Sullivan. Your exhibition costs are due in 3 days. Your artists will need to be paid. Your reputation is at stake. Veronica felt trapped. The terms were predatory, but her options were disappearing hourly. What Thomas didn't disclose was that his investment included a provision transferring the gallery's most valuable relationships to his existing art ventures if specific performance metrics weren't met, metrics designed to be unattainable. I need time to consider this, she said finally. Of course, Thomas replied. You have until tomorrow at noon. After that, I have another investment opportunity requiring my attention. As Veronica left Thomas's office, her phone buzzed with a text from Dominic. We need to talk. Something's wrong. Across town, Dominic paced his loft, anxiety evident in every movement. His professional life was unraveling with alarming speed. Following the loss of his biggest client, 3 more had canceled contracts citing concerns about professional conduct. His gallery representation had placed his upcoming exhibition under review. More disturbing were the anonymous emails he'd received containing fragments of private conversations he'd had with Veronica, discussions that had occurred in his supposedly secure loft. When Veronica arrived, he immediately launched into his concerns. Someone's targeting me, he said, voice tight with paranoia. Clients canceling, reputation being questioned, possible surveillance. This isn't coincidence. Nate, Veronica said quietly. It has to be. How? Dominic demanded. How could he possibly have this kind of influence? What neither of them realized was that Nate had methodically cultivated relationships throughout their professional spheres for years. His security firm provided services to galleries, tech companies, financial institutions, creating a network of favors he could call in when needed. He has resources we don't, Veronica admitted. But he can't sustain this forever. We just need to weather it. Dominic poured himself a drink, hands visibly shaking. I'm not just losing clients, Veronica. I'm being systematically destroyed. And now I think my loft is bugged. Veronica's eyes widened. That's impossible. That's illegal. Is it impossible for someone who specializes in security systems? Dominic countered. What they didn't know was that there were no physical bugs in Dominic's apartment. Instead, Nate had exploited a vulnerability in Dominic's smart home system, a system installed by a contractor who occasionally worked with Harmon Security. Every conversation was being captured through Dominic's own devices. We need to be smart, Veronica insisted. Kingston Thomas has offered funding for the gallery. It's not ideal, but it would give us breathing room. Dominic's expression darkened. Thomas? He's a vulture, and he's connected to everyone in this city, including your husband. What choice do I have? Veronica asked desperately. Before Dominic could respond, both their phones chimed simultaneously with text message alerts. Identical messages from different unknown numbers. Betrayal has consequences. This is just the beginning. They stared at each other, genuine fear reflected in both their expressions. Meanwhile, Nate sat in Florence's operations center, watching their reactions via Dominic's compromised security cameras. Florence stood beside him, expression troubled. The psychological pressure is working, she observed. But, Nate, this is bordering on harassment. It's justice, he corrected. And we've broken no laws. Every system we've accessed had security vulnerabilities that my company had legitimate reasons to test. Florence hesitated. The text messages. were sent through untraceable channels using prepaid devices, Nate finished. Impossible to connect to us. On screen, Veronica was now frantically calling her mother, while Dominic searched his apartment for listening devices he would never find. What's next? Florence asked. They'll make predictable moves under pressure, Nate explained. Veronica will take Thomas's predatory deal out of desperation. Dominic will attempt to salvage his reputation by distancing himself from the situation and from her. You sound very certain. Nate's smile was cold. People are predictable when they're afraid, and I've studied these particular people very carefully. The next morning, as predicted, Veronica signed Kingston Thomas's investment agreement. By afternoon, Dominic had suggested they take a break until their respective situations stabilized. Nate received confirmation of both developments within hours. Phase 1 was complete, isolation achieved. Now is time for Phase 2, escalation. Chapter 6, The Unraveling. 3 weeks later, Veronica stood in her gallery, surrounded by the wreckage of what should have been her career-defining exhibition. The reviews had been brutal, not because of the art itself, but because half the feature artists had withdrawn at the last minute, citing professional concerns. Kingston Thomas leaned against the doorframe, his expression a practiced blend of sympathy and calculation. This is unfortunate, he said, gesturing to the half-empty space, particularly given the performance metrics outlined in our agreement. Veronica fought to keep her voice steady. Those withdrawals were orchestrated. Someone contacted my artist with lies about the gallery's financial stability. What she didn't know was that this someone had been a series of anonymous industry sources, all carefully cultivated false identities created by Florence's team. No direct connection to Nate, but devastating in their cumulative effect. Conspiracy theories won't help your situation, Thomas replied. The fact remains that your exhibition failed to meet the minimum revenue requirements specified in Section 5.3 of our agreement. You never intended this to succeed, Veronica realized aloud. This was a setup from the beginning. Thomas's smile thinned. Business is business, Miss Sullivan. I'll have my team begin the transfer of your key artist relationships to my other ventures immediately. After Thomas left, Veronica sank into her office chair, the magnitude of her situation finally hitting her. In less than a month, she had lost her marriage, her financial security, and now her gallery's most valuable assets. Dominic had practically disappeared, responding to texts with increasingly brief messages before stopping communication entirely 3 days ago. Her phone rang. Her mother. The bank called. Patricia said without preamble. They're saying the home equity loan is in default. They're starting foreclosure proceedings. Veronica closed her eyes. That's impossible. I made the payment last week. They're saying it wasn't received. Patricia's voice cracked. Veronica, I'll be homeless in 90 days. The systematic destruction of their financial lives continued relentlessly. What neither woman understood was that Nate had accessed Patricia's banking records through his connections and identified a pattern of late payments stretching back years. He hadn't caused the default. He had simply ensured that the bank wouldn't offer their usual courtesy extensions this time. Across town, Dominic sat in a small cafe, opposite a man who had introduced himself as a journalist researching art world scandals. I understand your reluctance, the man said smoothly, but this story is going to break with or without your input. Wouldn't you rather control the narrative? What exactly is the story? Dominic asked warily. The journalist, actually an actor hired by Florence, slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts of emails, text messages, and photos documenting Dominic's pattern of relationships with wealthy married women, alongside financial records suggesting these relationships coincided with unusual payments to his business. The working title is The Photographer's Lens, Art, Affairs, and Financial Exploitation, the man explained. We have sources alleging you targeted wealthy women, including Veronica Sullivan Harmon, for both personal and financial gain. Dominic's face drained of color. These are private communications. How did you get them? The man shrugged. Sources close to multiple affected parties. The question is, what's your side of the story? What Dominic didn't know was that the journalist had no intention of publishing anything. The meeting had one purpose: to pressure Dominic into making a desperate move that would further Nate's plan. By evening, Dominic had done exactly what Nate predicted. He called Veronica in a panic, demanding to know if she had shared their private communications with anyone. "Are you serious?" Veronica responded incredulously. "My life is imploding, and you're accusing me of leaking our messages?" "Someone is preparing a hit piece about me," Dominic hissed. "It includes details only you would know. Or maybe your pattern of seducing wealthy women finally caught up with you." Veronica shot back, anger overriding caution. There was a long pause before Dominic responded, his voice cold. "You know what? Maybe your husband is right about you. Maybe you deserve what's happening." He hung up before she could respond, leaving Veronica staring at her phone in shock. Their relationship, already strained, had now fractured completely, exactly as Nate had engineered. At his operations center, Nate reviewed the day's developments with Florence and Lyle. "They're turning on each other," Florence noted, sliding reports across the table. "Dominic has booked a flight to Los Angeles for next week. Appears to be a one-way ticket. Running," Nate observed with satisfaction. "But he won't get far enough." Lyle studied his friend with growing concern. "This level of manipulation." "Nate, you've made your point. They're suffering. Maybe it's time to..." "To what?" Nate interrupted sharply. "To show mercy? Did they show mercy when they planned their little getaway with my money? Did Patricia show mercy with that text at the airport?" "This isn't just about them anymore," Lyle argued. "I'm worried about you. This obsession is nearly complete," Nate finished. "The final phase begins tomorrow." After Lyle left, Florence lingered, her expression troubled. The detective called again. "He's asking questions about our involvement in Dominic Walsh's situation." Nate nodded, unconcerned. "Porter is thorough, but he has nothing concrete. Every move we've made has plausible deniability built in. And the offshore accounts? The false identities? All legitimate security testing protocols documented in our company records," Nate replied smoothly. "We've broken no laws, Florence." "That doesn't make it right," she said quietly. Nate's expression hardened. Right and wrong aren't binary states. They're determined by who writes the history. Later that night, alone in his temporary apartment, Nate reviewed the final elements of his plan. The psychological pressure had achieved its purpose, isolating Veronica and Dominic, turning them against each other, creating financial desperation. Now it was time for the trap to close completely. He opened his laptop and initiated the final sequence, a series of commands that would activate the most devastating elements of his revenge. By morning, the carefully constructed facades of Veronica's and Dominic's lives would begin their final collapse. His phone buzzed with a text from Theodore Bryant. "Documents ready for your signature. Last chance to reconsider terms." Nate responded simply, "No changes. Proceed as planned." The attorney had prepared divorce terms that would leave Veronica with nothing beyond personal possessions. The prenuptial agreement they'd signed gave Nate considerable leverage, but his current demands exceeded even those provisions. Ted had warned that a judge might view the terms as punitive, but Nate wasn't concerned. By the time the divorce reached a judge, Veronica would be in no position to contest anything. As midnight approached, Nate stood at his window overlooking the city lights. Tomorrow would bring the culmination of weeks of careful planning, the spring of a trap designed to irreparably destroy those who had betrayed him. He felt no satisfaction, no anticipation, only the cold certainty of inevitability. They had made their choices. Now they would face the consequences. Chapter 7. The Trap Closes. The gallery was eerily quiet as Veronica arrived early Monday morning. The weekend had brought no respite from her cascading problems. Her mother facing foreclosure, her professional reputation in tatters, and now Kingston Thomas demanding an emergency board meeting to discuss ongoing viability concerns. As she unlocked her office, she noticed an unmarked envelope on her desk. Inside was a single sheet of paper containing account numbers, transaction dates, and amounts, documenting a pattern of funds moving from her gallery's accounts to an offshore entity over the past year. Transactions she had never authorized. Her blood ran cold as she recognized what she was looking at, evidence of embezzlement that implicated her directly. The amounts coincided with gallery cash flow, the timing aligned with her accounting software access logs, and most damning of all, several transfers had occurred while she was in Cabo with Dominic. A note at the bottom read, "The authorities receive these records at noon unless you are at the Harborview Hotel, room 712, at 11 a.m. Come alone." Across town, Dominic received a similar envelope. It contained photographs, clearly taken with a telephoto lens, showing him meeting with several of his wealthy female clients in intimate settings. Alongside these were bank records showing payments to his business following each encounter. His note read, "The wives, husbands, and art world receive these at noon unless you're at the Harborview Hotel, room 712, at 11 a.m. Come alone." Neither knew the other had received similar instructions. Both assumed Nate was behind the messages, yet both felt compelled to comply. The evidence presented would destroy what remained of their lives. At precisely 10:55 a.m., Veronica entered the upscale Harborview Hotel, her expression carefully composed despite her internal turmoil. In the elevator, her hand trembled slightly as she pressed the button for the 7th floor. 3 minutes later, Dominic arrived, taking a different elevator to the same destination. They met in the hallway outside room 712, surprise and suspicion instantly coloring their encounter. "What are you doing here?" Veronica demanded. Dominic's expression darkened. "I was about to ask you the same thing. Did he contact you too?" Before she could respond, the door to room 712 opened. Inside stood not Nate, but Theodore Bryant, Nate's attorney. "Please come in," Ted said formally. "Mr. Harmon has authorized me to discuss terms with both of you." The hotel suite had been transformed into a makeshift conference room. Documents were arranged neatly on the table, alongside folders marked with their names. A laptop was open, connected to a projector displaying a digital countdown clock showing 45 minutes remaining. "Where's Nate?" Veronica asked, tension evident in her voice. "Mr. Harmon prefers not to be present for this discussion," Ted replied evenly. "He has provided comprehensive documentation and instructions regarding your situations." He gestured to the chairs. "Please sit. We have limited time before certain automated processes execute." Dominic remained standing. "This is blackmail." "No," Ted corrected. "This is negotiation. Blackmail would imply Mr. Harmon is seeking personal gain through threats. He is merely offering you both choices with clearly defined consequences." He opened the folders, revealing duplicate copies of the incriminating evidence they'd received that morning, alongside additional documents neither had seen before. "Mr. Walsh, these photographs and financial records suggest a pattern of using romantic relationships for financial gain. Ms. Sullivan, these transaction records indicate systematic embezzlement from your gallery. I never authorized those transfers." Veronica protested. "Perhaps not consciously," Ted replied smoothly. "But the digital evidence, access logs, authentication records, suggests otherwise. At minimum, it demonstrates negligence in securing your financial systems." He turned to the projector screen. "In approximately 42 minutes, unless I enter specific cancellation codes, this evidence will be automatically transmitted to relevant authorities, business associates, and media outlets." "What does Nate want?" Dominic demanded. Ted slid 2 document sets across the table. "Mr. Harmon offers resolution through these agreements." Veronica scanned the papers before her, face paling. "This is insane. He wants me to sign over all remaining interests in the gallery, admit to financial mismanagement in writing, and agree to never work in the art industry again. Your agreement also includes a provision for a single Fiji Airlines ticket to Australia, departing tonight, along with $100,000 in a new account," Ted added. "Sufficient for a fresh start far from here." Dominic's agreement contained similar professional destruction, a written admission of unethical behavior, agreements never to work with his major clients again, and surrender of his professional equipment and portfolio rights. His fresh start was a ticket to Spain and $100,000. "He wants us gone," Dominic realized, "completely erased." Mr. Harmon wants resolution, Ted corrected. The manner of that resolution is entirely your choice. The countdown on screen showed 38 minutes remaining. And if we refuse? Veronica asked, voice barely above a whisper. Ted gestured to the evidence folders. Then at noon, your professional and possibly legal troubles begin in earnest. The choice is yours. What neither Veronica nor Dominic knew was that Nate was indeed in the hotel, watching their reactions through a camera hidden in the conference room's smoke detector. Florence sat beside him in an adjacent suite, monitoring the feed. They're panicking, she observed. As they should be, Nate replied. The evidence is compelling, even if manufactured. Florence raised an eyebrow. You created false embezzlement records. I created nothing false, Nate corrected. Those transfers did occur, from accounts Veronica had access to, authenticated with credentials matching her patterns. That she didn't authorize them is irrelevant to how the evidence appears. On screen, Dominic and Veronica had moved to opposite sides of the room, their body language hostile. You did this, Veronica accused Dominic. You needed money for Cabo, so you used my gallery accounts. That's absurd, Dominic shot back. You're the one who insisted on that expensive resort. You said you had the money handled. Their relationship, already fractured by pressure, was now completely shattered by mistrust, exactly as Nate had planned. The countdown showed 30 minutes remaining. In the conference room, Ted remained impassive as Veronica and Dominic continued arguing, each becoming increasingly convinced the other had caused their downfall. The agreements require signatures from both parties, Ted finally interrupted. Mr. Harmon anticipated you might blame each other, but the outcome remains the same. Sign or face the consequences. 28 minutes remaining. Dominic was the first to break. This is insane, but I can't risk my entire career on principle. He grabbed a pen and began initialing pages. Veronica watched in disbelief. You're giving in? Just like that. Wake up, Veronica, Dominic snapped. Your husband has outplayed us at every turn. I'm cutting my losses. The realization of her complete isolation finally hit Veronica. Her husband had orchestrated her destruction. Her lover was abandoning her. Her mother was losing her home, and her professional reputation was in tatters. I want to speak to Nate, she demanded. Directly, before I sign anything. Ted checked his watch. That wasn't part of the arrangement. Then I'm not signing, Veronica stated, folding her arms. In the monitoring room, Florence looked to Nate questioningly. Let her stew for another 5 minutes, Nate instructed. Then I'll go in. True to his word, 5 minutes later, Nate entered the conference room. His appearance had changed subtly over the past month. His face leaner, his eyes colder, his entire bearing more predatory. Veronica gasped slightly at the transformation. This was not the man she had married. This was something else entirely. You requested a conversation, Nate said, his voice devoid of emotion. You have 10 minutes before the deadline remains in effect. Dominic, who had finished signing his documents, stood to leave. I'll wait outside. No, Nate commanded. Stay. You're part of this conversation. The authority in his voice froze Dominic in place. Veronica searched Nate's face for any sign of the man she had known. Why this elaborate scheme? Why not just divorce me and move on? Because consequences should match actions, Nate replied evenly. You didn't simply have an affair. You calculated. You used my money to finance your betrayal. You left me standing in an airport terminal with nothing but a cruel text. Actions that deliberate deserve responses equally measured. So this is about revenge, Dominic interjected. Nate's smile was chilling. This is about justice. Revenge would have been simpler, perhaps violent. Justice requires changing the fundamental circumstances of your lives, as you changed mine. The countdown showed 15 minutes remaining. The choice remains yours, Nate continued. Sign and disappear to your respective destinations with enough money to start over. Or don't sign and face the evidence I compiled. Evidence you manufactured, Veronica accused. Evidence that would convince any reasonable observer, Nate corrected. The distinction won't matter once it's released. Dominic edged toward the door. I've signed. Are we done? Nate's gaze remained fixed on Veronica. That depends on Ms. Sullivan. The use of her maiden name, the formal erasure of their marriage, wasn't lost on Veronica. In Nate's mind, she had already ceased to be his wife. With trembling hands, she picked up the pen. You've won, Nate. I hope it brings you peace. Peace was never the objective, Nate replied coldly. Justice was. As she signed the final document, the countdown on screen stopped at 7 minutes remaining. Ted collected the papers, verifying each signature methodically. The tickets and new account information are in these envelopes, Ted explained, sliding sealed documents across the table. Ms. Sullivan, your flight departs at 10 p.m. Mr. Walsh, yours at 11:30 p.m. Different airports, as specified by Mr. Harmon. And if we don't take these flights, Dominic challenged, then the evidence release is merely delayed by 24 hours, Nate replied, and international extradition becomes a concern. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. One final detail. Should either of you attempt to contact the other again or return to this country within 5 years, the evidence releases automatically. My systems are monitoring your communications and movements indefinitely. The casual mention of such comprehensive surveillance sent a chill through both Veronica and Dominic. Neither doubted Nate's capability or determination to enforce these terms. After they left, Florence joined Nate and Ted in the conference room. They've accepted the terms, Ted confirmed. Legally, this concludes the matter. Ensure the flight manifests confirm their departures tonight, Nate instructed Florence, and maintain surveillance protocols for the full 5-year term. 5 years of monitoring. Florence questioned, is that really necessary? Necessary? No, Nate admitted. But appropriate? Absolutely. As they gathered their materials, Detective Porter appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. Mr. Harmon, he said formally, I'd like to speak with you regarding some concerns about potential harassment and coercion. Nate remained perfectly composed. Of course, Detective, though I'm afraid you've been misinformed. What occurred here today was a private legal settlement between parties. My attorney can provide all relevant documentation. Porter's eyes narrowed. Settlements usually don't involve flight manifests and surveillance threats. These weren't usual circumstances, Nate replied smoothly. But I welcome your investigation. You'll find everything done today was technically legal, if unconventional. The emphasis on technically wasn't lost on Porter. But as Ted had assured Nate repeatedly, the line between aggressive negotiation and coercion was subjective, and Nate had carefully remained on the legal side of that line, leaving no evidence that would stand up in court. As Porter departed with a warning to remain available for questioning, Nate felt no concern. The trap had closed exactly as designed. By tonight, both architects of his betrayal would be on separate continents, their former lives systematically dismantled. Justice, as he defined it, had been served. Chapter 8. Collateral Damage. 3 days after Veronica and Dominic departed for their forced exiles, Patricia Sullivan sat across from Nate in his temporary apartment. Her once haughty demeanor had been replaced by desperate resignation. You've destroyed my daughter's life, she said without preamble. Are you here to destroy mine too? Nate studied her dispassionately. Your foreclosure situation is unfortunate, but it stems from your own financial mismanagement, not my actions. Don't pretend you had nothing to do with it, Patricia snapped. The bank suddenly enforcing terms they've overlooked for years? That has your fingerprints all over it. I simply ensured no special treatment was extended, Nate corrected. The preferential handling you've received in the past was due to my relationship with the bank's executives. That relationship has evolved. Patricia's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her purse. What do you want, Nathaniel? Why arrange this meeting? Nate slid a document across the coffee table. A rental agreement. A modest apartment in Albany. Paid for 1 year in advance. Albany? Patricia questioned, confusion evident. Why would I move to Albany? Because your options here have expired, Nate replied matter-of-factly. Your home enters foreclosure next week. Your social standing is compromised by association with your daughter's situation, and your retirement funds are depleted. The clinical assessment of her circumstances hit Patricia like physical blows. This is your idea of mercy? Exile to Albany. This is my idea of resolution, Nate corrected. You played your role in this situation. The text message at the airport. I never sent any text. Patricia protested. Perhaps not intentionally, Nate conceded, but your phone did. And your subsequent actions, supporting their betrayal, enabling their relationship, make you complicit. He tapped the document. 1 year in Albany. Time to rebuild away from the consequences of your daughter's choices. The alternative is navigating homelessness in a community that no longer welcomes you. Patricia's expression hardened. You're a monster, Nathaniel. I always told Veronica you were cold, but this is inhuman. No, Nate corrected quietly. This is precisely human. The calculated response to deliberate harm. The natural consequence of choices made with full awareness of potential outcomes. Against her pride, Patricia signed the agreement. Within a week, she had relocated to Albany, effectively removed from Nate's world, just as her daughter had been. Meanwhile, Detective Porter continued his informal investigation into Nate's methods. Over coffee at a downtown diner, he presented his concerns to Lyle. Everything technically legal, but ethically questionable, Porter explained. I can't prove coercion, but I know it occurred. Lyle remained carefully neutral. Nate's been through a traumatic betrayal. People respond in different ways. This wasn't just responding, Porter argued. This was a systematic campaign to destroy lives. I've seen the aftermath of vendettas before. They rarely end cleanly. What exactly are you suggesting? Lyle asked, eyes narrowing. Porter leaned forward. I'm suggesting your friend is on a dangerous path. Power and control can become addictive, especially when justified by righteous anger. Nate's actions were extreme, Lyle acknowledged, but the situation is resolved now. Everyone has moved on. Have they? Porter questioned. Or has he simply moved the pieces off the board temporarily? The detective's words lingered with Lyle long after their meeting. That evening, he confronted Nate at his operations center, where Florence was presenting updates on Veronica's and Dominic's activities in their respective new locations. This needs to end, Lyle said firmly. The monitoring, the surveillance, all of it. Nate barely glanced up from the reports. It continues for the full 5 years as planned. They're gone, Nate. They've lost everything. It's done. It's done when I say it's done, Nate replied, an edge entering his voice. The monitoring ensures compliance with our agreements. Lyle glanced at Florence, who subtly nodded her agreement with his concerns. This isn't about compliance anymore. This is about you not letting go. Nate finally looked up, his gaze coldly analytical. Interesting perspective. Incorrect, but interesting. Porter is still investigating, Lyle pressed. He believes you've crossed lines that can't be uncrossed. Porter has suspicions, but no evidence, Nate replied dismissively. His investigation will conclude exactly as I've planned. The casual confidence in Nate's tone sent a chill through Lyle. What does that mean? What have you done? Nate smiled thinly. I've simply ensured that certain information about Detective Porter's financial history becomes relevant to his superiors if his unofficial investigation continues. You're blackmailing a police detective? Lyle asked incredulously. I'm applying appropriate countermeasures to an unnecessary intervention, Nate corrected. Porter has a gambling problem he believes is well hidden. It isn't. Florence exchanged an alarmed look with Lyle. Nate, that's going too far. Porter was just doing his job. His job didn't include pursuing personal vendettas against me. Nate replied evenly. Actions have consequences. Porter should understand that better than most. Lyle took a step back, physically distancing himself from his friend. Listen to yourself. This isn't justice anymore. This is power for its own sake. For a moment, something flickered across Nate's expression, a brief recognition, perhaps, of how far he had traveled from the man he once was. But it vanished quickly, replaced by resolute determination. You're welcome to remove yourself from the situation if your conscience requires it, Nate told Lyle coldly. But this continues as planned. Then I'm out, Lyle stated firmly. And I think Florence should be too. Florence hesitated, torn between loyalty to her employer and growing ethical concerns. Nate, maybe we should consider. Consider what? Nate interrupted sharply. showing mercy to those who showed none, trusting people who have proven themselves untrustworthy. He gathered the reports, his movements precise and controlled. I expected more loyalty from both of you, but I've prepared for this contingency as well. What contingency? All demanded. The possibility that my closest allies might develop inconvenient moral qualms. Nate replied matter-of-factly. Florence, your resignation letter is already drafted. You'll find it includes a comprehensive NDA regarding all operations you've witnessed. Florence paled. You prepared for me to quit before I even considered it. I prepare for all possible outcomes, Nate confirmed. It's what makes me effective. The calculated coldness of his response confirmed Lyle's worst fears. His friend had transformed into something unrecognizable, a man who viewed even his closest relationships as tactical elements to be controlled. As Lyle and Florence departed, both having chosen to step away from Nate's orbit, they left behind a man who had achieved his vengeance, but lost himself in the process. Alone in his operations center, Nate reviewed the monitoring systems tracking Veronica in Australia and Dominic in Spain. Both were complying with his terms, their lives reduced to shadows of their former existence. Patricia was settled in Albany. Detective Porter had received a warning from his superiors about his concerning financial choices, and Kingston Thomas had successfully absorbed the most valuable elements of Veronica's gallery. Every piece had moved exactly as Nate had engineered. Victory was complete, comprehensive, and cold. Yet as he sat surrounded by the technological tools of his revenge, Nate felt no satisfaction, only a hollowness that his calculated justice had failed to fill. The betrayal that had driven him remained, transformed now into something harder and more permanent, a fundamental restructuring of how he viewed the world and his place in it. Trust, connection, vulnerability, these were weaknesses he would never permit himself again. The fortress he had built around his heart was now impenetrable, reinforced by the success of his revenge and the knowledge that he needed no one. In the silent operations room, illuminated only by monitoring screens tracking the scattered pieces of his former life, Nathaniel Harmon embraced the solitude of victory and the cold comfort of power perfectly applied. Chapter 9. The Empty Fortress. 6 months after Veronica's and Dominic's forced departures, Nate stood in the empty expanse of his newly purchased penthouse overlooking the harbor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city where he had systematically destroyed those who betrayed him. The space was minimalist to the point of austerity. No photographs, no mementos, nothing that connected him to his past life. Even the furniture was selected for function rather than comfort, creating an environment that reflected the man he had become: efficient, uncompromising, detached. His phone rang. Theodore Bryant. The Sullivan-Harmon divorce is officially finalized, Ted informed him. Judge Westfield had some questions about the terms, but ultimately signed off given the pre-existing agreements. And the financial settlements? Nate inquired. All executed as specified, Ted confirmed. Your ex-wife maintains her exile with no legal claims remaining. Former wife? Nate corrected coldly. Ex implies a continuing connection. There is none. Ted's sigh was audible through the phone. Nate, as your attorney and someone who's known you for years, I have to ask, was it worth it? Worth is subjective, Nate replied. Justice was served. That's what matters. After ending the call, Nate moved to his home office, where multiple screens displayed the ongoing monitoring of Veronica's and Dominic's separate situations. Florence's replacement, a technically brilliant but morally flexible security specialist named Victor, had maintained the surveillance protocols without Florence's ethical hesitations. The data showed Veronica working at a small gallery in Melbourne, living in a modest apartment, her social media presence non-existent. Dominic had fared worse, unable to rebuild his photography career in Barcelona, now working as a tour guide for English-speaking visitors. Their destruction was comprehensive, their isolation complete. Just as Nate had designed, a notification appeared on one screen, an alert from the system monitoring Patricia Sullivan's activities in Albany. She had attempted to contact Veronica through an encrypted email service, violating the terms of her arrangement with Nate. With mechanical precision, Nate activated the appropriate countermeasure, a pre-written notification to Patricia's landlord terminating her lease, effective immediately. No second chances, no warnings. Simply the promised consequence of attempting to breach the isolation he had engineered. The clinical efficiency with which he executed this punishment revealed how thoroughly Nate had embraced his new identity, that of an impartial arbiter of justice, unmoved by emotional considerations, dedicated solely to enforcing the terms he had established. Later that evening, as Nate prepared for a business dinner with potential clients, his doorbell rang unexpectedly. Security protocols should have prevented unannounced visitors from reaching his penthouse. Through the security camera, he saw Lyle waiting in the hallway. After a moment's hesitation, Nate remotely unlocked the door. "Your security team needs better training," Nate observed as Lyle entered. "Unscheduled visitors shouldn't reach this floor." "I still know all your protocols," Lyle replied, glancing around the sterile environment. "Jesus, Nate. It looks like no one actually lives here." "What do you want, Lyle?" Nate asked, not offering a drink or seat. Lyle met his former friend's gaze directly. "Detective Porter killed himself last week." The statement hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken accusation. "I'm aware," Nate replied evenly. "His gambling debts became public. An unfortunate situation." "Became public because you made them public," Lyle countered, after he refused to stop looking into your methods. Nate's expression remained impassive. "I revealed nothing that wasn't true. His choices led to his consequences, just as Veronica's led to hers." "Do you hear yourself?" Lyle demanded. "A man is dead, Nate. A good cop with a family. A man who was just trying to do what he thought was right. Collateral damage occurs in any conflict," Nate replied with unsettling detachment. "Porter chose to involve himself in matters that didn't concern him." Lyle stared at his former friend, searching for any sign of the man he had once known. "What happened to you? This isn't justice anymore. It's cruelty for its own sake." "Your moral assessments are irrelevant," Nate stated coldly. "The matter is resolved." "Nothing's resolved," Lyle shot back. "You're still monitoring them, still controlling their lives from afar. You haven't moved on. You've just built a more sophisticated cage for yourself." Nate checked his watch pointedly. "I have a dinner engagement. If you've delivered your message, we're done here." Lyle shook his head sadly. "You know what the difference is between you and your father? He had the decency to destroy only himself when he was betrayed. You're taking everyone down with you." The reference to his father, the first time anyone had dared make such a comparison, flickered briefly across Nate's controlled expression. "My father was weak," Nate replied, his voice dangerously soft. "He surrendered to circumstances. I mastered them." "No," Lyle corrected, moving toward the door. "You surrendered to something far worse. The belief that power is the same thing as strength." After Lyle departed, Nate stood motionless in his pristine, empty penthouse. For a brief moment, doubt crept into the fortress of certainty he had constructed, not about the justice of his actions, but about their cost to himself. He dismissed the thought almost immediately. Sentiment was weakness. Attachment was vulnerability. He had eliminated both from his life, replacing them with control and power. The hollow feeling that occasionally surfaced in quiet moments like this was simply the echo of the man he no longer needed to be. His phone alerted him that his car was waiting downstairs. He straightened his tie, checked his appearance in the mirror, noting with satisfaction the cold efficiency reflected there, and headed to his business dinner. The Nathaniel Harmon who had once loved Veronica Sullivan, who had invested in her dreams and believed in possibilities, was gone. In his place stood a man who had discovered his true nature through betrayal and revenge, a man who would never again permit himself to be vulnerable, never forgive a transgression, never trust another soul with his heart or future. As he rode the elevator down to the lobby, Nate reflected on the comprehensive victory he had achieved. Every person who had participated in his humiliation was now suffering consequences precisely calibrated to their actions. Justice, as he defined it, had been served without compromise or mercy. If that justice had transformed him in the process, had hollowed him out and replaced warmth with calculation. That was simply the price of victory. A price he had paid willingly, with eyes open to the man he was becoming. The elevator doors opened to the lobby. Nathaniel Harmon stepped out, alone, unforgiving, and utterly victorious in a game where winning had cost him everything that once made victory worthwhile. He had become the architect of a perfect revenge that left him the sole inhabitant of an impenetrable fortress, secure in his power and utterly isolated within it. And he convinced himself that was exactly what he had wanted all along. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos